Saltwater History, episode 173. A little bit of a break there, but we're back. Richard, what's going on?
The natives were growing restless after our bye week or during our bye week, and so we got to push out this episode
Yeah,
lest there be rebellion in the
the
ranks.
Tridentine Brewing was about to pull their sponsorship for a little bit there because they were getting concerned about the amount of volume on
Right.
the podcast.
Yeah.
Our overlord, our Tridentine overlords.
Yes. To whom we get all our talking points, and we just throw them out there for everyone to consume, along with delicious Trentine beer, by the way.
How was your golf trip?
It was fa actually fantastic. As miserable as the spring has been here, I say spring in quotes here in the Midwest, that last week, was just a beautiful respite from the otherwise gray and not so balmy weather that we've been experiencing in the Midwest. So it was sunny and 80s in beautiful Western Illinois, and that is a different when you're in Western Illinois in the Galena area or even the Quad Cities area, you realize or you start to think, I'm not in, there's no way I'm in Illinois anymore because it's hilly and beautiful and just the people are tremendously gracious, kind, welcoming, and therefore you don't think you're anywhere near a place that features Chicago as its major metropolitan area.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful trip. Yeah, great. 80s and sunny every day.
Yeah, it's been brutal this May. This May has felt like November-y at times.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Very. In fact, if we had that weather during October, we'd say, oh, this is kind of a shitty fall or
Right.
October so far. But hopefully we're going to see some sun and some very nice spring-like weather.
Last episode, it was right after the new pope was appointed. A bit of a dark pilled episode, a little black pilled. And 2 weeks later, do we have any shift in your reaction?
Nope. The clouds and tempests that I predicted, like Cheryl Scott from ABC News, coming around the corner are arriving. And so my skepticism, unfortunately, yet again, has been confirmed or seen as more than reasonable and understood as the outcomes being likely here. And there's already emanations from the Vatican and Leo XIV that the Francis pontificate, if not in its total essence, then in its, I suppose, residual effects is going to continue by and large. We already have news from the Diocese of Charlotte in North Carolina that the new bishop, following Traditionis Custodes, has outlawed the traditional Latin Mass from the 1962 Missal. And there were thriving TLM parishes in Charlotte, just as there were in Detroit months ago. And that bishop, newly appointed by Francis, and then obviously affirmed by Leo because there's not been action against him, have followed TC, Traditionis Custodes, and outlawed the traditional Latin Mass, thus attempting to crush the truly vibrant, young, youth-filled, and exuberantly passionate about the Catholic faith and the liturgy and doctrine within the church, particularly within the United States, but in places like France and elsewhere where traditional mass parishes are thriving. So Pope Leo is not doing anything about it. So why should we suspect that there's going to be a reversal of TC or a Mors Laetitia or any of the other great scourges that Francis unleashed upon Holy Mother Church? And it just so happens as you investigate further, the bishop has relegated these several parishes with large congregations to a chapel where they can have the traditional Latin Mass, of course, twice a month, only twice a month on Sundays, and it's 30 miles away from Charlotte, from downtown Charlotte. And it's not even in an operative Catholic church. It's in a former Protestant congregation church that the diocese has purchased, and it's not even furbished as a Catholic church yet. It's like in the boonies. So this is the ghettoization that is so much a part of those who revile for their own demonic and disgusting reasons, the tradition and the traditional liturgy of the church. So meanwhile, these bishops like this Bishop Martin in Charlotte are having homilies where high school Catholic girls are brought up to the altar in the sanctuary and the mitre is put on them. For what is this? This is the effects of the synodal church that Pope Leo is so celebratory of and supportive of. That's what occurs when you don't have, as according to canon law, which was further not established but confirmed by Leo XIV's Leonine predecessor, Leo XIII. You cannot have, as we're going to speak about in just a few moments, you cannot have women, non-ordained obviously, ruling over and governing over ordained clerical men in the clerical state. And that is what Francis created in his curial appointments, never done before, and what Leo is now affirming and confirming, and even adding to. So this is we should be alarmed. Let the toxins sound.
What else is there that you're saying he's adding to?
Well, there are things that he's doing, or more so through inaction, in not remedying the problems and the heretical, let's call them assertions, or more so even deposits into the Acta Apostolicae Sedes, which is the AAS, which is kind of catalog of doctrinal and dogmatic affirmations, statements, declarations that was established way back in 1909 by Pius X. And what it's meant to do is to clarify for the purpose of successive catechetical statements and doctrinal statements for people who are in apologetics, in the clerical state, and in the lay state as well. You see? So think of it as a baseline, if you will, for what would later be elaborations in the 1994 Catechism, and then successive encyclicals or missives from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, or the whatever they call it now. It should be just the CDF. Anyway, that's what it's there for. And what did Francis do? But in his clearly heretical encyclical Amoris Laetitia, in I believe paragraph 8 and footnote thereof, that corresponds to that paragraph 8, he asserted that Jesus is wrong, that those who remarry, who divorce and remarry, are not, according to Francis, committing adultery and not therefore committing grave and mortal sin, and thus can be received in full communion with the church and thus receive the Holy Eucharist at the most holy sacrifice of the Mass. This is contrary to basic fundamental teaching of in Revelation by our Lord himself. And it has been the constant teaching and tradition of the Holy Roman Catholic Church. To have this asserted in there is really going to be Timothy Gordon, who you and I are fans of, and rightly so, on most things. He said this is the litmus test. Because if Leo doesn't remove this from the AAS, the Acta Apostolicae Sedis, then what we have is the problem of persistent and consistent non-teaching of error, purity from error by the papacy and the holy pontiffs, but within the official teaching and the habitual constant teaching of the church. So therefore, then and this all stems really from a lack of defined, precise, and sharp clarity that emerges from two ecumenical councils. And in this critique, our Orthodox brethren are correct to the extent that both Vatican I and Vatican II needed to be more precise. And certainly in the case of Vatican II, the outside, external, both Protestant and Jewish heavy influences that colored documents, and even, for example, in the case of Nostra Aetate, by and large composed or directed the composition of certain documents, that needs to be the writing and the doctrinal statements need to be more precise. There has to be elaboration upon them. or they have to be expunged totally in order to be kept in consistent, non-contradictory teaching with the deposit of the faith that has echoed through the church from the time of Christ and the apostles.
So you mentioned litmus tests. Do you have any
Oh, yes.
personal litmus tests of your own to be
Thank
checking
you.
on?
Yeah, you read my mind because you'll recall that in our previous episode on Pope Leo, we talked about what my litmus test would be. And it wasn't Timothy Gordon's, although I would add his that the AAS has to be expunged of, or I'm sorry, the entry on Amoris Laetitia regarding divorced and remarried Catholics and reception, and actually their state within the church has to be corrected, or that has to be taken out of the AAS. My initial, and I would assert that it still stands as my number one, as particularly my number one litmus test, is how he, and this shows, this might show our bias, our you're in my collective bias here because we're so heavily into Austrian economics and anarcho-Catholic capitalism and these revelatory ideas. I would go so far as to say that they're life-giving ideas. They're certainly clarifying, to be sure, to the point of enlightenment and liberation. In true, not liberation theology, but good liberation, both on a personal basis, but in an ideological sense. It really is his interpretation, or more so what he gleans and takes from Rerum Novarum. Rerum Novarum being the famous 1890s encyclical on social ethic and teaching regarding the church that was, of course, written by several different ghostwriters, many of whom either taught or worked at or were students at the Angelicum, which is the Dominican university, three of whom were Dominicans themselves. And they were heavily influenced, as Timothy Gordon, the aforementioned Timothy Gordon, has had a great series on. He goes paragraph by paragraph breaking down Rerum Novarum on his podcast Rules for Retrogrades, which I highly recommend. But in that series, he reminded me of the first times that I read Rerum Novarum, and my take was always that it's a tremendously right-wing Lockean document. That is to say, in that encyclical, which is the bedrock of modern Catholic social teaching. It's from there that subsequent Septuagesimo Anno, Quadragesimo Anno, later popes would use Rerum Novarum and then celebrate the anniversaries, the 40th anniversary, the 70th anniversary of its pronouncement and dissemination. Well, it hits you that it's there that whereas Augustine and Aquinas and the Fathers and the Scholastics were more than flirting, they were in a kind of love affair with establishing principles like subsidiarity and property rights as being inherently human and inalienable. It's there that Leo says subsidiarity is thoroughly Catholic. It is consistent with revelation and tradition. And not just consistent with it, it is prominently and properly operative if justice is to be achieved, both for in the individual sphere, familial, and certainly within society, within the nation, and even world and global affairs. Yeah. And then his further, albeit again very Lockean. I Timothy Gordon says it's Lockean. Now I would go so far as to say it goes back more so to men like Richard Cantillon and the Spanish scholastics at Salamanca, for example, the Juan de Mariano, the Francisco de Vitorias of the world, who were establishing basic economics at the time and arguing over, well, how do we get to what we would determine as just price or just wage for a worker? Uh, they had a defense of what previously might be termed as usury, which they later reformed as saying, no, loaning monies for the purpose of creating capital and therefore capital goods is a good thing, and certainly not prescribed against by Christ himself, who talked about lending all of the time as our divine economist. So, and obviously perfect interpreter of human action. So what my litmus test is how is he going to interpret it, Rerum Novarum? Because it's like so many teachings and documents of the church, it's been so either ignored or taught for in a habitual and vicious way that, well, it's just a pro-union document and it has socialistic tendencies, and none of that's really in there. In Rerum Novarum, for example, Leo talks about the legitimacy of workers collaborating together for a just wage. Now, by the way, he doesn't go so far as to define a just wage beyond that it cannot be lead to one to destitution, yeah, or complete impoverishment so that the basic means of life can't be attained by the laborer. Well, that's a very general principle, isn't it? And more so, it's not as if those classical economists, whether they be Protestant like Locke or Smith, or before them Catholic like Cantillon, or the scholastics to be sure, that they didn't obviously assert that there are duties of the of capital toward labor and conversely labor to capital. What the socialistic and leftist interpretation of Rerum Novarum always omits and leaves out purposefully is that Leo talks so much about freedom of contract in Rerum Novarum, which is a Misesian principle. And Karl Menger, Catholic, Friedrich Hayek, somewhat Catholic, would also espouse. Eugen von Bavaria, my recollection is Catholic as well. And by the way, some of the great leading lights of the Austrian school today, like George Guido Hosman, Lou Rockwell, Tom Woods, all Catholics. So they see this immense consistency with Rerum Novarum and Austrian economics, for example. So I did send Tim a tweet, a message saying, look, as much as I see that there's Locke in Rerum Novarum, isn't it amazing to think that Mises and Rothbard, okay, two Jewish men, largely agnostic in their faith, would produce a praxeological economics that is just as much consistent with and in keeping and fitting with Rerum Novarum as anything else. And he liked the tweet, so he clearly agreed with me. He didn't elaborate, but he agreed. So we don't want to what I the true breaking point for me is if he comes out as a South American missionary from the south side of Chicago and embraces a more liberation theological socialistic Marxism that has infected the church, especially in South America, and views Catholic social teaching emanating from Rerum Novarum as just an affirmation of labor's rights and an assertion that, or more so confirmation that there is an antagonism that ought to be ultimately the church's side. There's a from the socialistic and Marxist point of view, Bolshevik point of view, that there's a natural antagonism between labor and capital. And by the way, Leo the 13th was adamant that there ought not be. There's not a natural antagonism. There's not a fundamental, essential antagonism between those who have possession of capital goods and those who don't, but yet labor in a way, the proletarian, for a lack of a better term. I hate to use the Marxist term, but it just works here, the working class. If Leo the 14th comes out and affirms that there's a natural antagonism toward labor and that somehow both the state and the church ought to be animated in favor of labor and antagonistic, therefore, toward capital, we have a Marxist pope, another Marxist pope. And as such, we have yet another heretical papacy. And therefore, we have another anti-pope. And the problem, therefore, I was having lunch with actually parents of a dear friend of mine yesterday, and they asked my opinion about Pope Leo. And the gentleman, who's a very bright and intelligent man, said, "Look, it's really how could yes, it was perhaps possible, but given the cycles now that you've had of Francis and how through the dicasteries, but more so through the appointment of cardinals and naming cardinals. I mean, he's just stacked the deck. And if you have another long papacy, I mean, and you have a very socialistic or Marxist pope, and one that is, as we're going to see momentarily through his appointments in the Curia, is going to further establish and ensconce Francis Church. Where's the remedy coming? Because he's just going to appoint more cardinals that are synodal, that are opposed to tradition, and as we're seeing here, at the very best, apathetic to traditional Latin Mass or strong hardcore Catholicism. And if there's, I'm sorry, of course, throughout time, ever since the incarnation, Jesus' birth, death, and resurrection, if there's ever been a greater need for hardcore Catholicism, it's right now, as relativism reigns, as envy exists, as you're dealing with a technocratic globalist cabal and these absurd hoaxes of government efficiency and necessity, and furthermore, climate change and Gaia worship, as our dear friend James Delingpole always says, it's a hoax, baby. Get rid of it. Don't believe in it. Oh, we have to mend our ways and submit to Mother Gaia. It's a gigantic hoax. I love his line in it. By the way, Watermelons, his great work on the climate scam, is available in a renewed edition. Go out and buy James Delingpole's.
Your Darling Pool's getting pretty good. I want
Delingpole's getting
to.
pretty. He's always been amazing.
No, I know, but your
Oh, my
impression.
impression. Yeah.
It's getting pretty good. You're listening to him a lot. You can tell.
Yes. Oh, for sure. I'm honing it. I'm honing it. Soon enough, I'll be like AI Delingpole.
I want to do a mini segment here, and then we'll go to the next topic. Let's do this Family Feud style, right?
Hmm.
Survey 100 people, give us the top 6 or 7. You can distribute points where you want
Okay.
to. Why is the Catholic Church taking so long on the full embrace of the free market? And I'll give you some options,
Okay.
right? That we've already talked about a bunch of times.
Yes.
Poor leadership slash messaging, dependence on the state overall for
Hmm.
many of the poorer Catholic churches.
Yes.
We've talked about it could just be like there. I know there's some people that you and I might talk to that don't fit in either of those categories that we just think just aren't as educated in the free market economics in general.
Yes.
So
The
those are 3 examples. What are like the top 6?
indoctrination, I would think, would be one. I would assert would be one. And the reason I say that is because, Ludwig von Mises had a great book called The Anti-Capitalist Mentality. And what has really pervaded in the mindsets, worldviews of the various medium of information, or various media of information that have insinuated themselves into the minds and thus form the worldviews of, well, especially Westerners, but really the world over, is this: to be in favor of the free market means that you're in favor of manipulation. You're in favor of manipulation by evil bankers, financiers, corporate heads, corporations themselves, and that you're sort of a dolt to buy into the proper operation of the free market. And Tom Wood says this all the time, and I happen to agree with him. The very terms that are used are very slick for people to drink this intoxicant of anti-capitalism. For example, the word regulation. Now, regulation not only sounds innocuous because it's just a rule governing behavior or operation and interpersonal relations, right? It sounds so innocuous and almost comforting. Yeah, and that's the word that Woods uses, that regulation sounds comforting. That without it, without regulations, rules in shorthand, there'd be chaos, there's disorder, there'd be exploitation of workers, there'd be exploitation of the environment. These are the constant themes, you see. Unless there's some altruistic group that we ordain as society, let's call them governmental officials or public servants, yet another term that is used in the semantic war. Well, then all of us are going to be in a state of nature that is not the Rousseauian state of nature that we that he argued we have to get back to, but in a caveman-like dystopia wherein there are indeed the haves and the have-nots, and they in the propaganda of this line of thought, which is the prevailing line of thought that dominates, well, exchange and worldviews today, is that if we don't have governmental officials doing it, well, then there'll be these, it will go back to their own misperceptions of the state of the United States, for example, or France or Britain in the Gilded Age, where the Rockefellers and the De Beers are ruling the world. Well, again, it's from a fundamental misunderstanding, or more so, I wouldn't even call it an apathy or indifference, but it's an active atheism against the operation of the true free market. They just think it's an impossibility. So that would be my one. Um, Two would just be one thing that you didn't mention that I would argue is most prominent, and this is what Thomas Sowell said about, and Walter Williams said about the attraction of socialism. It's just built on envy. I forget who the quote was from. I posted it. It was from someone who's a good follow on Twitter called Sal the Agorist,
I know.
and he
Yeah.
said the only thing a socialist doesn't want from you is your job. You see, so this very powerful vice of envy, and furthermore, oh, speaking of too, another prominent person on the web is Leonardo Joni, my favorite and only women comedian of any salt and worth. Um, what did she say the other day that was really powerful? I just had it. Uh, it'll come back to me, but she's been saying stuff that's right along those lines. Like, look, the thing that the left wants least is your is oh no, this is what her point, that the aggrieved minority populations, or just simply aggrieved populations that always want to self-victimize and thus be placed in a, they're all narcissistic. It's like they fit the pattern, the psychological pattern of the actions of a narcissist. It's never your fault. It's always some extrinsic force acting upon you that is causing your demise or despair. It's never the responsibility of your actions. And so, therefore, their reactions pedantic in this pedantic exchange is always the emotive, but it's okay to be emotive because there's some external force that you can't control that is causing your ill. So that's another point. And socialism and anti-capitalistic mentalities feed upon that envy, to be sure. What was the other one you mentioned?
Overall dependence on the state.
Yes, of course. Very good. So when the state can position itself as the remedial mediator to that, and we talked about so often within our own podcast and work about this invisible force that's out there that the state always pins itself against, can never be fully vanquished. So therefore, it requires even more treasure, more blood, more energy, and more officials and bureaucrats to wage war against it. It's perpetual. It's
Yep.
never ending. It's eternal. Then again, state asserting its role as God in a messianic, no institution has a greater messianic complex than the state, right? Whereas Christ and the angels and the saints and Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, triune God, wage active war against real forces of evil and degradation and extant in the damned souls, in the demons, and the devil himself. That's an actual war. The state perpetuates a false or phony war against injustice, terrorism, poverty. Yeah, that is never solved, never reined in. And then when, by the way, in it, like an example of the Cold War, I was just speaking with Augie, my son, the other day because he's studying the Cold War in school right now. He said, "Well, why didn't we?" He asked me after 1991, when the 89, the Berlin Wall falls, the Eastern
Mhm.
Bloc disintegrates, and you have the liberation of Eastern Europe. And then on December 25th, Christmas Day, 1991, the Soviet Union dissolves. Why didn't the United States downgrade its or uh, diminish and reduce its military budgets. I didn't mean to be dismissive of his question, but I laughed out loud and I immediately felt remorse because he was asking a sincere
A
question,
genuine, yeah,
a genuine good question about what would logically, if the assertions of the Cold War that we're fighting global communism for the purpose of freedom throughout the world, and then what happens? You just see, well, the Soviet Union's gone as a threat, so we're gonna insinuate oligarchs that are favorable to the United States to rob Russia blind for the next 15 to 20 years. And then on top of that, while Russia's being treated like a cadaver state and a failed state for the purpose of American technocratic and bureaucratic largesse. So then we got to find a new enemy. So let's just intimate to Saddam Hussein that he can indeed invade Kuwait for the purpose of securing oil rights that the Kuwaitis were siphoning off from Iraqi territory. We indicate that to an ally. George Bush did this. We know this. George H.W. Bush did this. And then we can create an entirely new boogeyman, an enemy in radical Islam, but we use a secularist Baathist Iraqi state to then say that it's Islamic, and then we can bounce off that and do all of Israel's bidding and create 30 years of unending warfare in the Middle East. Yay! You
yeah.
know, that was so people aren't aware, if they're not aware of what these governmental cabals are doing, then they still have this sense that they're just the pious, good, altruistic regulators, right? The public servants. Not the case. Was there another one that might be on the board before I get an X,
No,
like on Family Feud?
I think that those were good. I was thinking about, yeah, I guess indoctrination being number one. That covers a lot of different areas, but
Sure.
I like those. Just having the ranking in your mind of those three.
Yes. Could I also add a fourth that and see if this doesn't produce the X and you can give me a Steve Harvey laugh for being such an idiot, like he does, like, oh God, now dumb,
Yeah.
you know. But I was thinking too about how people who are even trads in Catholicism or Orthodox, well, I wouldn't say Orthodox evangelicals because that's a contradiction in terms, but let's say just fervent Christians, or even, so let's say just dedicated monotheists, or for that matter, just religious, generally speaking, and fervent about their religion. They're authentic in their religion. Well, the real prominent religions in the world, whether they be Islam, Catholicism, because we're just going to say that is Christianity, authentic Christianity, they've been told, and this, I guess this is a subset of just the indoctrination, that you can't be religious and in favor of the free market. That you're in favor of the monopoly man with his monocle and his cane instead of Jesus Christ. That's all liberation theology. That's all bunk, right? And two, even in my throwing out this caveat, I'm not trying to say, or corollary better, is I'm not trying to say that the Rockefellers are good people. That's
Yeah. Right.
so far from, but that's what I have to say, just in the same tone that Dave Smith has to say, well, I'm not a Trumper. And here's why. He has to throw out that preamble before he goes into his other analysis.
Yeah, I've got one suggestion too. I think
Okay.
the libertarian, especially left libertarian messaging, where
Mm.
remember that Freedom Fest segment we went to where it was all
The
about
institutions guy?
no,
Oh.
not him, the sex workers girl.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Good point. Good point.
Those people, and then
The
obviously
confusion of
atheists.
libertinism with
There
libertarianism.
you go. There you
Yes.
go. And then all the just the obsession of the all drugs should be legal takes, which we might even agree with, but that might rub somebody that might not, know what we're trying to say. That might rub them the wrong way.
Yes.
And they
Yes.
might just say, "Well, I don't want my kids anywhere. I don't want my kids to be able to,
Correct.
you
So
know,
I think that this is the what I call the good boomer trap, right? There are good boomers out there who are receptive to the economic ideas. But when you get into the social ideas, they immediately say that that's libertinism or that's hippieism. But it's so they don't give you the time, and I've encountered this so many times. In fact, going outside the boomer generation, you and I have a mutual friend who's beginning to study for the priesthood, who was a former student of mine, who was a friend of yours. You know who I'm speaking of?
I know who you're speaking of.
Okay, we don't have to bring
Let's
up
not
his name.
dox him.
But you no, but he is an immensely bright, diversely talented individual. I mean, through the span of human activity, this guy is just alpha in terms of intellect and alpha in terms of talent and capacity. Wouldn't you say?
Could have chosen to be great at a couple
Pretty.
dozen different things and
Yes.
is deciding to be a great priest.
Yes. So in all of the human pursuits activities, if he dedicated his mind and energy to it, he'd be great at it. Just
Right.
could be medicine, could be law, could be
Acting.
veterinary sciences, and whatever it is, it could be political theory or chemistry. I don't care what it, this guy would be great at it just because of the sheer power of his intellect and the fortitude of his soul. Uh, but when you and I presented to him in a very friendly exchange, probably a year and a half ago or
Yeah.
18 months ago, he had that. Whoa, not that he wasn't so stupid as to say, because he's not stupid, who will build the roads, right? But he said, well, that's anarchy. Yes. And then you have to explain, well, what we mean by anarchy is not chaos. We're not in favor of chaos. We're not in favor of injustice. We're not in favor of, we're, in fact, by our very nature, we're against aggression and victimizing of innocent people. That's what the core of the philosophy is. Zero aggression principle and all. But and furthermore, oh, this is a big one too, Charlie. That when we confront people who are capable of imbibing the notions of anarchy, particularly in anarcho-capitalism, or especially anarcho-capitalism, uh, they tend to think, well, not only is it chaos, but it leads to and I lost my point here because I was thinking about anarchy. Oh yeah, well, just simply that there are no that there's no rulers or that there's no order, correct? And that we're arguing for a pure type of utopia. That we're not arguing for utopia. We understood well, I would go so far as to say better than anybody in the intellectual spectrum, the limitations and the concupiscence of men, right? But we're not willing to, given the concupiscence of men, say that there's a certain elect group of people who are obviously and identifiably inferior should have some sort of mystical power over us to rule as if they're immune from it. And that has to be the not based enlightenment conclusion, right? Whether you're Voltaire, Locke, Rousseau, all the way down to Hegel and Marx and Kant. They just simply say, well, you have to cede power, and Locke too, unfortunately, Locke too, we have to cede power. Of course, we could try to limit that. Of course, you're really letting an evil go that can't be recaptured when you cede your liberties over to a government. So yeah, they think that I think the person of whom we're speaking, who's in formation to be a holy Catholic priest, and may God achieve that in him for the benefit of the church and all of us and the world. When he says, "Well, that's anarchy," I think what he's saying is you think you're going to create a utopia with that. We're not trying to create a utopia. We're just trying to create the most just, in a way, absence of a system that allows for freedom of exchange, mutual voluntary cooperation, social cooperation, as Mises intended for human action to be first entitled. And that entails, by the way, a meritocratic hierarchy. Especially people like our friend who are more inclined toward meritocracy and achievement, and those who have the most capacity ought to have the most influence and say and authority. Yes, that's exactly what would be created or allowed for if indeed you dissolve the state, which is this constant force that acts contrary to and is antagonistic toward and sees as its enemy, its great, uh, its great enemy. Yeah, meritocratic hierarchy. We would have that, and that's what the market provides if you allow it to function.
You want to talk Thomas Massie?
Well, we still have to go over the Leo things just to affirm that because we went in this side digression about his
You're right.
interpretation.
You're right.
But can we go through just again, we got to shake the rust off a little bit here from our bye week and our prolonged absence from the waves, the pod waves. But I mean, let's just go through the laundry list, and you could bring these up on your screen if you want, just to have people affirm whether it's the life site story about the appointment of a lesbian nun to rule over priests, which is anti-canonical and against the church's constant teaching tradition. We have from the literal, uh, the literal Saint Gallen diocese and church, the appointment of a bishop. He was a priest in St. Gallen in Switzerland, in the town. I mean, this is the actual place where the St. Gallen Mafia itself met. That's why it's called the St. Gallen Mafia of homosexualist cardinals and bishops and prelates. And they proceeded, of course, to push Francis to recognize the legitimacy of gay unions and marriage. Uh, there's nothing that is what was the it's not what was the document on blessing same-sex marriages or blessing couples? I forget. It's Fiducius Supplicans. Okay, so there's nothing from Fiducius Supplicans that isn't in a sense written by the St. Gallen group. Yeah. And here's Leo in one of his first acts, he affirms, because there's a kind of weird system in Switzerland that dates back to the Reformation, about how local prelates, that is, say, local priests and clerics, have a say, and auxiliary bishops have a kind of say in who is elevated to be considered as bishop in Switzerland. So, according to the story from LifeSite, the the church in Switzerland in St. Gallen elevated this guy as the prime candidate to be the succeeding bishop. His previous bishop was a heretic as well. So that's what the state of the church in Switzerland is at the moment. And this guy affirms that it's only a matter of time and is a necessary remedy of the church that women be ordained. This is open. That's open heresy. That's open heresy. And Leo put his stamp, his papal stamp on it. So
Yeah.
there's a problem. Okay, this is more Francis Church, and really the whole system that exists in Switzerland that allows the Swiss bishops to elevate and other prelates to elevate these candidates. In point of fact, with the say of the laity, by the way, what do we call that otherwise, Charlie? That's synodality. The way the bishops are chosen in this synodal or in this Swiss fashion is just synodality. So that's a problem. You want to go to the story of the lesbian nun? There she is. As Diane Montagna, faithful correspondent from the Vatican, reports in his first crucial appointment, Pope Leo XIV has named Sister Tiziana Mariletti, and she looks as much of the kind of manly lesbian as you would possibly imagine, of course, without a habit on. The former superior of the Franciscan Sisters of the Poor, as secretary of the dicastery for Institutes of Consecrated Life and Society of Apostolic Life. So much for brevity in Vatican body titles. She will serve under Sister Simona Brambilla, if you could hit the show more. There we are, who was named its prefect in January of 2025, just as Francis is dying, and is the first woman to lead a Vatican dicastery. Again, by canon law and the precedents of Leo XIII himself and the constant teaching of the church going back to Christ and St. Paul. Women are not to be governing over presbyters and bishops within the church. That is the constant teaching of the church. They don't have a capacity for it. The church is a patriarchy. It's the patriarchy of the apostles. It's an apostolic patriarchy that is now broken by successively Francis and Leo. Now he might, as Francis himself would say, he might be adamant about the non-ordination of women. But if you elevate women to rule over, in the sense, literally govern over presbyters and bishops and societies of religious and male clerics, essentially what you're doing is again throwing out the baby with the bathwater of church governance. For what? For what? For feminism. For feminism. And I will guarantee you that every possession on my life over to this wager, she believes in women's ordination. She believes in gay marriage. She believes in a radical reformation of the church that would make Luther and Calvin and Zwingli and Knox blush.
Yeah, this isn't great.
No. And then we already talked about at length. I had on fourth on my list was the litmus test, which we already covered. So, black pill or just clarity of vision, and mind from the last episode. What do you think so far?
I'm black pilled.
Okay. Well, that didn't take long, right?
No, it sure
all of
didn't.
2 weeks.
Yeah,
Charlie was on the hopium, and the
yeah,
hopium now he's in withdrawal.
yeah.
So there you go.
Damn,
Yep.
damn.
I mean,
No, the
again,
first. This is the first one.
yeah.
The first appointment.
Yes. Along with the bishop in Switzerland. So
Right.
yeah, not good. But, and it just came out today that he appointed Cardinal Sarah to be the Vatican's representative at, I forget what town it is, at Vannes
Okay.
in France for some anniversary dedicated to a miracle attributed to Saint Anne. Wow. So the most traditional Orthodox cardinal in the Curia, correct? Arguably. I mean, we could say Rinzai, or we could say Burke or someone like that, or Erdo or something. Well, Erdo's not in the Curia, but um, he says, just like Francis did with Cardinal Burke. Cardinal Burke is set to be the head of the Knights of Malta, basically sending him out to the boonies, right? This is like banishing him to John to Patmos, correct? Or Athanasius fleeing his sea, all those times. Um, and so yeah, he throws this. It's not even a bone. It's like a get out of here kind of thing. Get out of my hair. Thanks, Leo. Now, of course, Cardinal Sarah, with all his grace, will probably accept it with great fervor and trying to lead the pilgrims in France and faithful Catholics and devotees of Saint Anne in the most beautiful, solemn, and contemplative way during this celebration. But that's the work of a true churchman and son of Christ, right? Or
Amen.
son of God and brother of Christ. Okay, let's flip over to it. Maybe there'll be a great day where the great Thomas Massie will convert to the one true Catholic apostolic faith. There he is, but in meme form. For those of you who are listening just on audio, Charlie's brought up from the Eskimo Libertarian, who also is a great follow. He asked, "What's your favorite Thomas Massie meme?" And the Kentucky representative and only real American left in Congress is described as such as an image of Thomas the Tank Engine, and it says Massey, literally Massey every day at work, and it's Thomas with a kind of stern growl. How else would you describe that look, that visage?
Just angry.
Just anger and derision, right? He says, and underneath it says Thomas had never seen such bullshit before. So there he is. And poor Thomas Massey. Let's go ahead and do you want to play that brief speech he had on in the House of Representatives? Let's do that.
Well, I'd love to stand here and tell the American people, we can cut your taxes and we can increase spending and everything's going to be just fine. But I can't do that because I'm here to deliver a dose of reality. This bill dramatically increases deficits in the near term, but promises our government will be fiscally responsible 5 years from now. Where have we heard that before? How do you bind a future Congress to these promises? This bill is a debt bomb ticking. Congress can do funny math, fantasy math, if it wants, but bond investors don't. And this week, they sent us a message. Moody's downgraded our credit rating, and the bond investors who buy our debt and finance our debt demanded higher interest rates on the 10-year note, the 20-year note, and the 30-year note. What does this mean? Very soon, the government will be paying $16,000 of interest alone per U.S. family. And what are we telling them? Instead of taking care of that problem, we're going to give you a $1,600 tax break. Under the taxing and spending levels in this bill, we're going to rack up, the authors say, $20 trillion of new debt over the next 10 years. I'm telling you, it's closer to $30 trillion of new debt in the next 10 years. Mr. Speaker, we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg. If something is beautiful, you don't do it after midnight. I oppose this bill.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentlemen.
So there it is. I mean, poor guy. Should I just I have some facts here from the Congressional Budget Office about the passage of Trump's big beautiful bill. It's a big beautiful monstrosity, leviathan of a bill. But here, let me give you the direct facts about this. Where is it? Oh, it's right here. Okay. So, from the various nonpartisan analyses, estimates vary, but President Trump's, in quote, one big beautiful bill would increase the federal deficit by $3 trillion to 5.8 trillion over the next decade. The Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, estimates the tax provisions alone, Charlie, just the tax provisions, would add 3.8 trillion, while the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget and the Penn-Wharton Budget Management Model estimate 3.3 trillion to 5.3 trillion, depending on whether temporary tax cuts are extended. Now, of course, you and I are in favor of all tax cuts, all the way going down to zero, a la Ron Paul. But that has to come with an immense reduction in federal spending, and this bill does nothing of the sort. In fact, it pushes off any, as Thomas Massie says points out in other speeches that he's given before the House and in other communications with the general public, it just pushes off any spending with promises 5 years down the road. Now, of course, any reduction in spending coming from a prescription for 5 years down the road, who knows what type of government is going to be in power at that time.
Right.
But for that matter, it doesn't really matter, right? Because there's that great meme. What's that movie with Johnny Depp and the little kid where the little kid's crying on a bench with him and he looks up lovingly at him? And
I don't know what movie that is, but
I don't know what movie that is. It's great. It's a great meme set. And the little kid said is labeled Republicans, right? And the meme goes, but Trump was elected to cut the deficit. And then libertarians go, that's what Republicans and Democrats do, right? They always talk about deficit reduction, but never is achieved. Okay. So the great Thomas Massie, the last true good American in that horrific Bohemian Grove-like cesspool that is Washington, D.C. God bless him.
I don't know how he does it. I don't know how he
It's a supernatural grace and fortitude, I think. That
talk about eating lunch by yourself.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, there was a joy in that too. I mean, and I attribute it to kind of what I define as an Athanasian spirit. There's a heroism of being the person who says, I'm against the world. Well, Thomas Massie, St. Athanasius, Jesus Christ, the world is against you, and I'm against the world, right? He pursues truth and goodness and is a believer in the Gamaliel principle, right? We shall know them by their fruits. Well, look at the fruits that this monstrosity of the federal government, which literally, not figuratively, enslaves every American by taxation, by inflation, by regulation, correct? And then has the temerity and audacity to say, we live in the land of the free and the home of the brave. I mean, the Israelites in Egypt were taxed at a 10% rate. So how free are you? And at least they built temples that are standing. The things we built through our slavish activity are crumbling all around us. Not just the infrastructure, but our sacred institutions, right, Charlie?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about a town whose government also doesn't do a whole lot of reduction?
I love these introductions to Meanwhile in Oak Park. Let's hit it. Here it is.
Here it is.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
You should go to your gay suburb now.
The People segment, Meanwhile in Oak Park, brought to you by Trinity Brewing. Go get you some for Memorial Day weekend.
I know I'm
gonna have one or two.
Oh, you know it.
Have you tried the new hazy IPAs?
Nope, I haven't gotten them yet.
Oh my goodness. It's
Delicious?
number one for me. It's number one for me.
Whoa.
It took the
That's
Cristero
huge.
spot.
Trevor did recommend them to me. He said, and I did throw out the warning that I don't like IPAs in general, but he said this is a good IPA.
Okay, well I do like the hazy IPA already, so I was really excited for this. This is number one for me. Second Amendment.
And we've had offerings from Tridentine that aren't on the market, so Remember, we had the Empress Red
Oh,
Ale, for example.
I know. It's
So
but
we've had more than the general public,
yeah.
and we're all better off for it. Both of us are better off for it.
Second Amendment's number one for me.
Okay.
First story, and it's important because I think it's gonna be the last time we talk about him for a little while now.
Oh boy,
Ravi. Ravi.
Ravi.
He's become a big part of our weeks at
Yes.
times. And
Yeah.
I think this feels a little exit stage left to me that we
Maybe we
might
can
just
have him on now that he's out of Village Hall.
Ravi tells all.
Yeah. Or
The,
yes. The
Ravi
Ravi
tells
story.
all. The tells all. I think we're gonna be kind of let down. I think that I don't know. We
It
might be
wouldn't
let
be.
down by
It
that.
wouldn't be a soap opera like
It
as
would
we.
be it would be you. I feel like it would be us disagree with him more than
Yes. That's what I would be afraid of. Be like, okay, you are a Marxist, but you're just less Marxist than everyone else in Oak Park. That kind of.
Park. Yeah, exactly. Parrakat Robinson honored at final village board meeting. New Oak Park trustees were sworn in as the village honored departing trustees. Here's Ravi. Departing Oak Park trustees Lucia Robinson and Ravi Parrakat received commendation from their colleagues as the village board transitioned to its new configuration Tuesday. The Oak Park Board of Trustees adheres closely to tradition when it comes to the first sessions with a new board, making sure to honor the contributions of departing trustees as newly elected and re-elected officials are sworn in. Parrakat did not run for re-election. Instead, he mounted an unsuccessful campaign to be elected village president. Robinson lost her bid for re-election. The two thanked their colleagues and loved ones for their support and spoke to what they were most proud of about their times on board. And then here's the ad for the Village of Oak Park, the local ad. Think about a career in local government.
That's
Not,
great.
not me.
No, no. Remember what you said? Would your personal hell would be being forced to be a meter maid for Oak Park?
Yeah. Or just in general, but especially Oak Park. I can never be, that's the one job I could never do.
Oh my God! Just the thought of it makes Charlie miserable.
$1 million a year. You couldn't. $1 million a year.
He's a
And
man
I
of
would say
principle,
no.
folks. He's a
I
man
would
of
say
principle.
no.
He's not a sellout.
Parrakat remarked that he never would have seen himself working in local government when he first immigrated to the United States. I didn't know that as a young man. Quote, when I first came to this country so many years ago, I never thought for a minute that I would ever be in local politics, he said. Oak Park has been so generous and kind to me and my family, and we found a true sense of belonging here.
Unlike in India, no one belongs. No one belongs in India.
Parrakat said he was proud of his record as a trustee. I have served with integrity and transparency, and I have really voted my conscience at every opportunity I got and tried to explain the rationale of my vote at every instance as well for the community at large, he said. These years have represented a lot of learning, and I have grown as a person during this process. I have gotten to work with a lot of incredible people in this community, both leaders and community members alike.
He is
He,
he is very expressive and articulate, so good for him. That already sets him apart from the rest of the Oak Park board.
He added, there have been so many of these great moments, and I cannot list them all, but these opportunities combined with what I was able to do through my service with Takeout 25, which was a COVID initiative to encourage restaurant takeout. It has been a fascinating and gratifying journey for me the last 4 years. The combination has given me a lot of satisfaction and connected me back with my original reason for joining politics, which is to serve people. Robinson thanked both the community and her family for supporting her as she worked to lead her hometown's municipal government. Quote, to the community overall, serving as one of your elected officials has been one of the greatest honors of my life, she said. My children, you inspire me, motivate me, and challenge me every day to be a better person, and that includes my role as a leader in this community. As second generation Oak Parkers, we have both grown up here and been molded by Oak Park's values.
Ugh.
We know in very deep rooted ways the potential this community has to live up to its commitments, and you each have helped me make at least some of those commitments a reality over the last 4 years. Newly elected trustees Jenna Leving Jacobson and James Taglia were sworn in at the meeting, as were re-elected village clerk Christina Waters, trustee Chibuke and Yia, and village president Vicky Skaman. Quote, I'm so proud of what we've accomplished.
What?
I'm so proud of what we've accomplished as a community as a community. That's what they
Yes.
said is a community. As a community through COVID-19 and a successful migrant response to support a vibrant, growing community that continues to strive to be racially and socioeconomically diverse for all generations, Skaman
Strive.
said.
If we could strike one verb from the English language, strive.
I am further honored to have been reelected to serve as your village president for a second term. Thank you for your trust in me to lead during these very trying times.
Oh, because Trump's president.
Next story, Oak Park OK's $5 million in water and sewer work. Oak Park will spend more than $5 million on a set of sewer and water improvements this year.
That
Oak Park,
actually, that picture of the major sewer construction site is just that's actually the condition of Oak Park roads before they do anything.
okay, so this is actually a topic yeah, right. This is in the conversation phase. This is the this is the conversation phase.
Yes.
This is a topic I'm kind of passionate about. The water in Illinois and in the Chicago area, a lot of people don't know this. I think I've mentioned this on the pod before. It's actually not clean. And we've talked about this. I know I've brought this up before, but everybody assumes that because we have a short distance from Lake Michigan, that we have the freshest water in the world.
At one
Uh,
time, or
Unfortunately, there's a process from taking it from the lake to your home.
yes.
And we have one of the worst infrastructures in the country for this.
Yes.
And a lot of locals don't even know this.
Despite
That
despite having more bureaucratic units than any other state, including massive states like California, Florida, and Texas.
the water in Illinois is not clean.
No.
Oak Park is prepared to spend more than $5 million on a set of sewer and water improvements over the next several months. The Oak Park Village Board was expected to approve a contract for Kendall County-based construction firm H. Linden and Sons Sewer and Water to oversee this round of village infrastructure improvements at its Tuesday, May 20th meeting.
Oh, they're hiring a bunch of Trump voters.
The project will involve a variety of construction work on both the sewer lines and the roadways, as the project will replace water and sewer mains on Forest Ave between Division Street and Greenfield Street.
Boy,
There will
would be nice to have a major concrete manufacturer in the village. Oh wait, they booted them out.
There will also be sewer and water main replacement on Columbian Avenue between Augusta Street and Division Street, along with water valve replacements on Berkshire Street, according to the village. Quote, the improvements consist of the installation of combined sewer mains, including residential service lines, precast manholes, drainage structures and catch basin connections, replacement of water main and water services, water valve replacements, combined sewer spot repairs, restoration of roadway, including curb and gutter, sidewalks, driveways, parkways, pavement markings, curb bump outs, hot mix asphalt pavement, according to the village.
Imagine the scores of certain men within Oak Park who just go to the Wednesday Journal and search manhole, and they come up and oh, this is about construction. God damn it.
Linden and
Son of a
Sons
bitch.
Linden and Sons bid of 5.788807 came in over the village's budget of 5.01870 million. So village staff has recommended reining in the project scope according to village board documents. Bidding on the project was open from April 10th to May 1st. The village also received a bid from Chicago-based contractor MQ Construction that topped out at over 5.9 million. The Linden firm is presently working on projects worth more than 6 million in contracts with other Illinois municipalities. The repairs will take place primarily along Forest Ave, Columbian Ave, and Iowa Street in the village, according to proposal documents. The project will require nearly 3,000 feet of new sewer pipes, with those materials comprising the largest portion of the project's expense, according to proposal documents. All work on the project must be completed by November 15th, according to the contract. Oak Park's Village Board was also expected to approve a one-year contract for towing services with O'Hare Towing Service via its consent agenda Tuesday night.
Spectacular.
5 M's. Which is actually important too.
I suspect that's a little low. I think they'll end up spending a little bit more than that, no?
Yeah, probably.
Hmm.
Anyways, kind of a boring segment, but that's the segment.
Yeah, still good.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
What would have happened if I'd gone for it and just said, no, I'm gay? Memorial Day
Yep.
coming up. Gonna relax a
Mhm.
little bit, but
Yeah.
besides that, I don't have much else.
That's all. Just keep your antenna up for what's coming from and emanating from the Vatican and from Washington and even your local municipality if you should be located, especially next to a village like Oak Park, Illinois.
Amen. Keep praying too.
Yep. Always pray. God bless.
Peace.